Now, first thing for Facebook Live now that we're on, go subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's just Real Conservative Talk. If I get kicked off of YouTube, I don't think we'll get kicked off Podbean, but, we get kicked off YouTube, we get kicked off of whatever else, we'll be on other platforms. So go subscribe to us on other platforms. Yeah. If you follow us on Facebook, go follow us on YouTube. What's that, Eric?
Well, like if in the event like Facebook decides to kick you off, you are already exploring other entities like DLive, Twitch, and Rumble as backup alternatives.
Yeah. So I'm on Rumble. Again, it's just Real Conservative Talker. You can look me up, Michael Key. We're on Rumble already. Videos are already uploaded there. We don't have a big following. I don't push it, but we are there. We're on everywhere. So if you can't find us here, just go look for us on another platform. More than likely, we'll be there. Now, I want to jump right into this because I don't edit the shows and I don't have time to bullshit. First thing, saw this article earlier. Eric probably knows far more about this than me, but I went into a show last, maybe yesterday or Sunday. I think it was Sunday. And the guy was questioning me about this, and I said, I don't like speaking on things I don't know a lot about because I hadn't read about it. But it's the whole Clarence Thomas and his wife deal. So here's an article. It's by The Hill. Came out today. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on Tuesday called on Justice Clarence Thomas, who is a conservative Supreme Court judge, by the way, to resign or face impeachment for what she depicted as a pattern of ethical breaches. This is coming from AOC, right? Quote, Clarence Thomas should resign, she wrote on Twitter. If not, his failure to disclose income from right-wing organizations, recuse himself from matters involving his wife, and his vote to block the Jan 6 Commission from key information must be investigated and could serve as grounds for impeachment. Now, I was kind of kidding around last week when the whole Ketanji Brown deal started. Just or I'll go back and check after the show as far as the voicemail, sorry. But it's when this whole Ketanji Brown questioning started, Clarence Thomas fell ill and went to the hospital due to the flu. And I was just kidding around. I said, isn't it kind of convenient for the Democrats and kind of, weird timing that Clarence Thomas, at the same time they're about to appoint a Democratic judge, he falls ill and is in the hospital too. What if that potentially opened up a spot for another Democratic appointee? Well, it looks like they're pushing that. Regardless if it's the flu or trying to impeach him, they're pushing for that. They're trying to equal out the their standing in the Supreme Court, which is primarily run by conservatives, which I'm fine with. But with that said, moving on, it says Ocasio-Cortez is just the latest in a series of Democratic lawmakers and legal experts to intensify ethical scrutiny of Thomas in the wake of explosive reports last week that exposed his wife's aggressive efforts to help overturn former President Trump's electoral defeat. Now, I've read a few articles about this. What is wrong with his wife being outspoken about how President Trump should have challenged the election results? That's not illegal. Challenging election results, they're challenged all the time. Al Gore challenged them. They did recounts. This is nothing new. Now, they want Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from the whole January 6th thing. As far as I've seen, his wife had nothing to do with the January 6th riots. Nothing. All she did was speak on her opinion, basically, on what Trump should do regarding the election results. She didn't start promoting January 6th riots, though, at all. Do you know how many people, a lot of people probably in this room listening to the show, didn't agree with the election results, but also didn't participate and weren't even fucking there when the January 6th riots went down? The majority of the people that didn't agree with the election weren't at the riots and had nothing to do with them. So my other thing I wanted to get at with this, and why I'm starting with this, is if Clarence Thomas has to recuse himself from any dealings with, the January 6th committee because of something his wife did, then Joe Biden would also have to recuse himself from fucking anything having to do with Ukraine because of his dealings that his son had there that are also under investigation, legitimate investigation with far more illegal wrongdoings and potential massive illegal actions that took place between there and China. Like how? So you're telling me Joe Biden is allowed to go over and completely dictate our total foreign policy with a country that his son did illegal businesses in, and he had a lot to do with too. But Clarence Thomas has to recuse himself for the January 6th committee's hearings and stuff because his wife sent a text saying that Trump should question the election results. How the fuck does that work out? Am I missing something? Does that not sound like a huge double standard?
Sounds like a double standard to me.
That's like, how is Pelosi, as guilty as her and her husband are with insider trading, not have to recuse themselves on any hearings that have to do with securities? They would, right? Just by that definition. Like, I'm not saying...
Well, like, if you look at the...
Good.
And if you look at the Pelosi's, you also have to wonder, like, why are the Pelosi's not even in jail for what they're doing?
Oh, why aren't half of these people in jail? Mitch McConnell, freaking Schumer, freaking Biden's, all of them. They're all as guilty. If you've been in there for 40 years, you're doing something that's kept you in there for 40 years. All right? And you're doing something illegal, more than likely. You're playing the fucking game. You are. That's how I feel about you. Go there, run for Senate, run for House, run for president, do it as a public service, and move on. Go back to a job, go back to your life, and stop wanting to be in damn power all the time. But that gets me into... Good.
And you hit that one right on the head, because our founders never intended for this culture of career criminal politicians, being in office for decades, when they only intended for you to only be in there for like maybe less than say 10 years, and then you go back home to your day job and to your families and to your farms, what have you. Because being a career politician wasn't meant to be something like lifelong.
No. Now, but that gets me into what my main discussion is for today. And I'm sure I'm going to have people that join the live show here. I'm not taking call-ins because I know a lot of people have strong opinions on what I'm going to talk about. And you'll see soon enough what I'm saying. But I want to talk about communism. But I want to talk about communism. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read from this. This is out of the Communist Manifesto directly. And all it is they took the Communist Manifesto and they broke it down. They broke the sections down and put it into questions and answers. But the answers are derived directly from the writings in the Communist Manifesto. And I want to react to this. And it was extreme. It's not eye-opening for me because I've known all this, but it may be eye-opening to a lot of you guys. But if you don't know what communism is, like everyone should go and study communism. Why? Because you need to know what it is, you need to know how to identify it, and you need to know why the fuck you don't want it to happen. And why it doesn't work. All right? It's not just an economical thing, it's a political way of thinking. It's a societal way of thinking as well. And it's very scary. Now, I'll just read the first question. It's what is communism on here? And it's communism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. Now, a couple definitions. A proletariat, when I say proletariat, that's a working class individual. Proletariats is the working class. The bottom of the bottom is what they really define it as, like that lower income class. The other one is the bourgeois. The bourgeois is defined as middle class, but it's really the way they use it in the writing, like your upper, wealthier class, all the way up to your really wealthy individuals. But they define it as the middle class. And they say that they really demonize the middle class in these writings. By the way, this is written by Frederick Engels, who is the co-writer of the Communist Manifesto with Karl Marx. So the first main thing I want to get into, it says, what working classes were there before the Industrial Revolution? Now, the Communist Manifesto was written in about, I believe, 1848, around there. It was after the Industrial Revolution really began over in Europe and England. And that's when they started writing and coming up with their little bullshit theories. According to them, Marx and Engels, there was no such thing as the working class before the Industrial Revolution. You had slaves, you had serfs, but you didn't have the proletariats, you didn't have the working class as we know it today, which would be like me, be like, I don't know, there's probably some people in this room that are in the 1%, maybe not, but I would imagine, based off statistics, the majority of people that are listening to the show are working class or lower, middle or working class, right? And it says the working classes have always, according to different stages of development of society, lived in different circumstances and had different relations to the owning and ruling classes. In antiquity, the workers were slaves of the owners, just as they still are in many backward countries and even in the southern part of the United States. Now, again, this was written back in 1848, all right? It's the next question. It says, in what way do proletarians differ from slaves? This is where it starts to get interesting. The answer: the slave is sold once and for all. The proletarian must sell himself daily and hourly. Goes on to say, the individual slave, property of one master, is assured in existence, however miserable it may be, because of the master's interest. The individual proletarian, property as it were of the entire bourgeois class, which buys his labor only when someone has need of it, has no secure existence. This existence is assured only to the class as a whole. So what they're saying is that it's better to be a slave than it is to be a working class citizen. Why? Because a slave is always needed. Let's say, and they're going back to the southern United States. You had a farm, you had a plantation. They buy a slave, they feed that slave, they provide the basic necessities for that slave so that slave can go and work. Therefore, the demand for that slave is always needed because that work needs to be done. They're not getting paid hourly, they're not getting paid at all, but at least that slave will always have a job, and it will always have food on the table, it will always have the basic necessities supplied to it, and there will always be a demand for that slave. But when it comes to a working class citizen, the working class citizen has to sell themselves hourly and daily. And that working class citizen, when you bring it down to an individualistic point of view, is not always needed. It's based off of demand. Take a migrant worker where maybe they go and work farms in the late winter down south, and then once those farms are done with picking, they don't need them anymore, so they get rid of them, so they got to go find someone else that needs the help of that migrant worker somewhere else. That's what they're saying the working class person is, or the proletarian is, and they're saying that only the class as a whole, because obviously there's always a demand for the workers, but there's not always a demand for the individual. So while the class will always have an existence, the individual is always having to fight, scratch, and claw to be able to go work, to be able to provide necessities. Therefore, their justification is that being a slave is actually far better than being a working class citizen. It says, the slave is outside competition. The proletarian is in it and experiences all its vagaries. The slave counts as a thing, not as a member of society. Thus, the slave can have a better existence than the proletarian, while the proletarian belongs to a higher stage of social development and himself stands on a higher social level than the slave. The slave frees himself when all of the relations of private property, he abolishes only the relation of slavery and thereby become a proletarian. The proletarian can free himself only by abolishing private property in general. So what they're saying there is that the slave, since they're owned by the master, right? And the master owns that piece of property, if they can just abolish that piece of property, then there's no demand for that slave and they can be freed. But all they do is become a proletarian then. All they do is become a member of the working class because now they have to go find a job instead of having the one given to them by the slave owner. Now, since they have to go find a job, now they're a part of the proletarian class. And then it's saying that's actually worse, and the proletarian class will always basically be a slave or a form of a slave unless private property in general overall is abolished. Again, communism is about public ownership. And I'm going to go deeper into this. But I don't know if this is interesting to some people, but it's interesting to me. But I think it's extremely important for people to actually realize what's going on. And towards the end here, I'm going to read something. You're going to see why I decided to do the show on this. So, the next thing they talk about, and we talked about this, I think, on Solid Blue Sister show yesterday. They go in, they're saying, it says, the introduction of free competition is thus public declaration that from now on the members of society are unequal, or from now on the members of society are unequal, only to the extent that their capitals are unequal. That capital is a decisive power, and that thereof the capitalists, the bourgeois, have become the first class in society. So because we have competition, they're saying that competition is bad because some people are better in competition. And because some people are better, now there's inequality. And because there's inequality, you have one class taking advantage of another class. Free competition is necessary for the establishment of big industry because it is the only condition of society in which big industry can make its way. It says, having destroyed the social power of the nobility and the guild masters, the bourgeois also destroyed their political power, having raised itself to the actual position of the first class in society. It proclaims itself to be the dominant political class. This it does through the introduction of the representative system, which rests on the bourgeois equality before the law and the recognition of free competition, and in European countries takes the form of the constitutional monarchy, which is like what England, Germany, and all them were at the turn of the century. Now, they said that the working class did not exist before the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is the cause to all of the problems that they list in the Communist Manifesto, which immediately means that these fucking communists and these Marxists and these socialists in the United States, I don't think they're fully aware that when you go that route, you're hindering innovation. You're hindering industrialization. You want a green society? Great. Communism tells you can go fuck yourself because you won't be able to do it under a communist regime because you don't have the support for innovation to create the technology needed to go green in the first place. And that's where my problem with these people on the left, the AOCs, the freaking squad, the Rashida Tlaibs, the Joe Bidens, the Bernie Sanders, my problem lies with them is because they don't understand really what they're talking about. You can't promote one class while not hurting others, and you can't promote business and industry and economy while trying to go socialist and communist. It doesn't work because it's against the whole idea of communism. Now, this next question, it says, what will the new social order have to be like? And I'll read this section. It says, above all, it will take the control of industry and of all branches of production out of its hands of mutually competing individuals and instead institute a system in which all these branches of production are operated by society as a whole. That is, for the common account, according to a common plan, and with the participation of all members of society. It will, in other words, abolish competition and replace it with association. Now, this is where the other day on Solid Blue Sister show, we were kind of discussing this. And I brought up competition. We are going down a path. So the whole participation trophy thing is a communist idea. Why? Because everyone gets the same award. When you start giving out participation trophies to the Pop Warner football team or the Little League baseball team, it doesn't matter if you get first, second, third, fourth, fifth, everyone gets a medal. Everyone's treated the same. We're getting away from incentivizing you to work hard and be better than someone. Because under communism and under socialism, it's not good to be better than someone. In fact, you're an asshole if you're better than someone. You shouldn't strive for greatness because everyone should be equal. Everyone should be putting in an equal effort. Everyone should be getting an equal result. No. It doesn't work like that. I remember seeing the videos, I believe it was in like Seattle or something, of a little soccer team, and they were playing without a ball. And the idea is they were going to play with an imaginary ball so everyone got a chance to fucking score. That's communism. That's wrong. See, in the United States, when I first went to Australia the first time, I remember my girlfriend's uncle said, especially growing up, you looked at they looked at the United States like, man, that's where you go to compete. That, they're all about winning, and they're winning in business, they're winning in sports, they're winning in whatever. It's all about winning. We had the fucking Cold War, all right, against a communist regime to show them that they couldn't keep up, and they couldn't. We outspent them, we outproduced them, we out-innovated them, and we still are. It's never worked for communism. And we are going down a path where we are actually saying, well, no, you can't score too many points on this team. You can't beat them by too much because we don't want to hurt their feelings. We're going to hire you because of your skin color or because of your religion, not because you're the best. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? When you start eliminating competition, go ahead.
Well, and I think where you're choosing like a particular class of people over a particular class of people who are qualified to do your job, but you're choosing people because of like a certain race or ethnicity or whatever creed or sexual orientation or what have you, you would be going into the area of affirmative action.
Yeah, and all of that stuff. Look, the first thing is to eliminate competition. And that's a problem with the human race. Why? Because we are an extremely competitive and extremely driven society. I brought this up literally 2 hours ago on Solid Blue Sister Show when I brought up our drive as human beings. What other animal has done what we've done and become an advanced race? What other animal gives a fuck about anything other than surviving that day? None. Only us. We're the only ones that have developed, okay, into a species where we are constantly seeking answers, be it answers about space, answers about our past. We're looking at back on history. We're looking about, where we came from. That's why we have all these religions. That's why we have all these different countries. That's why we have all this different shit. Think about this. We created weapons to go kill animals because we were a lot weaker than they were. The human being is the most dangerous predator on this earth. But we're the weakest, and we're not even close to being the biggest. But because of our mind and our intelligence, we're able to be that. Why? Because we have innovated over time and allowed ourselves to be put in that position. The same goes for business and the economy. The same goes for politics, where people are constantly trying to get up on one another and get to the top, right? And when someone is at the top, think about this. You have a pride of lions. You have the alpha male. Every once in a while, they may fight the alpha male, but most of the time they lose. That's why that lion's the alpha male. what do we do as humans? Well, if someone's better than me at something, or someone has more resources than me, we try and figure out a way to work around that and still beat them. And what does that do? That drives innovation. That drives creation. And that's how our society advances. Competition. Look at all the inventions that came out during the Cold War. The whole space race. How much did NASA create? How many products do we use in our life right now that came about during the Cold War and the space race? And the competition between us and Russia. The funny thing is, not Russia, but the Soviet Union. The funny thing is that half of that competition, and I'm referring to the Soviet Union, abided by this no competition, but damn if they weren't all about that hockey. Damn if they weren't pissed when they lost the United States in hockey. It's human nature. And that's why the Soviet Union failed, because they tried to go against human behavior instead of harnessing it and using it to its advantage. Yeah, great. They conscripted a bunch of guys that were good at hockey and forced them to practice for 11 months out of the year. And they became a great team. Great. But you can't have guys competing in one aspect and not competing in another, saying, well, you can't go on a business. You can't, we're going to pay you the same as this other cook over here. You're out winning hockey games for the Soviet Union, but this cook, we're going to pay him the same amount, even though he's working half the time and just feeding you. There's no incentive. And they ultimately collapsed. If you go look at the GDP between the United States and the Soviet Union from 1949 until 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and the growth in GDP, it's not even fucking close. By the way, growth of GDP, for those of you that don't know what GDP, that's basically the entire worth of the country and the size of the economy for the country. The GDP per capita is split up. You divide the total GDP by the total population, gives you GDP per capita. Ours is one of the highest. The only countries I think that really have a higher one are some small poto country like Switzerland and those countries that have like 2 million people in it. But as far as ones that have 330 million people, there's none that even come close. Which is impressive when you think about it. And the United States isn't perfect. But China's GDP, I believe, GDP per capita is around like 10,000 per person. Ours is around like 50 or 60. So 5 to 6 times more. But back to this, it says they want to abolish competition and replace it with association. Moreover, since the management of industry by individuals necessarily implies private property, and since competition is in reality merely the manner and form in which the control of industry by private property owners express itself, it follows that private property cannot be separated from competition in the individual management of the industry. Private property must therefore be abolished, and in its place must come the common utilization of all instruments of production and the distribution of all products, according to the great agreement, or to the common agreement. In a word, what is called the communal ownership of goods. In fact, the abolition of private property is, doubtless, the shortest and most significant way to characterize the revolution in the whole social order which has been made necessary by the development of industry. And for this reason, it is rightly advanced by communists as their main demand. You know what the Communist Manifesto reminds me of? A bunch of pussies that were jealous of people making money and being successful, and they were too fucking stupid to go do it on their own. That's what this is. Oh, Karl Marx is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. Yeah, fuck off. Who cares? Didn't Fauci win like a Nobel Prize too? Look at him, his idiot. I mean, look, anyone can come up with economic theory and make it sound good. I'll write one today and show you guys some bullshit thing that doesn't work, but I'll make it sound good. A lot of economics is theory. Doesn't mean it works. says private property has not always existed. Now, this is where it gets funny. It says, when towards the end of the Middle Ages, there arose a new mode of production which could not be carried on under the then existing feudal and guild forms of property. This manufacture, which had outgrown the old property relations, created a new property form, private property. And for manufacture and early stage of development of big industry, private property was the only possible property form. The social order based on it was the only possible social order. That's not true. The Romans were giving out private property to their soldiers after they won battles. So they don't even know the facts here. Private property's been around forever. All right? Just not in the fucking societies that they lived in. God, you get mad. You get more and more pissed when you read this stupid shit. I'm going to wipe my ass with this, by the way, as toilet paper when I'm done. Says, now, however, the development of big industry has ushered in a new period. Capital and forces of production that have been expanded to an unprecedented extent, and the means are at hand to multiply them without limit in the near future. Moreover, the forces of production have been concentrated in the hands of a few bourgeois. Again, for those of you that didn't hear, bourgeois is the middle and upper classes. While the great mass of the people, and they're referring to proletarians as the poor people, are more and more falling into the proletariat, their situation becoming more wretched and intolerable in proportion to the increase of wealth of the bourgeois. Do we not hear about this today, right? Oh, the wealth gap between the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. Maybe they're right, but we're going to hit on that in a second. And finally, these mighty and easily extended forces of production have so far outgrown private property and the bourgeois that they threaten at any moment to unleash the most violent disturbances of the social order. Now, under these conditions, the abolition of private property has become not only possible, but absolutely necessary. So let me read that again. That last sentence. It says, and finally, these mighty and easily extended forces of production, which they're talking about big business, have so far outgrown private property because even though the large businesses or private industries, they're saying that they get so big it's really not even private ownership anymore. In the bourgeois, that they threaten at any moment to unleash the most violent disturbances of social order. All the riots we see. Now, under these conditions, because they get people so pissed off at these large businesses, big pharma, big oil, big fucking sex toys industry, whatever they have, big, it's always big and then followed by some bullshit ass thing that they're jealous of. Unleash the most violent disturbances of the social order. Now, under these conditions, the abolition of private property has become not only possible but absolutely necessary. So they turn you on all the big businesses, big Amazon, big Google, whatever the hell. They get you pissed off at it, and they make it to where everyone's so mad. It's like, you know what, we can't do this anymore. We have to abolish all of these large industries and just get rid of it. Let the government control everything. Just make it publicly funded. Big weed is coming, Richie says. Yeah. I think they're voting on that this week, by the way. But I haven't confirmed that. But I did see something where they were supposedly voting on federal legalization of marijuana. Now, this is the big one I wanted to read. It says, what will be the course of this revolution? Above all, it will establish a democratic constitution, and through this, the direct or indirect dominance of the proletariat. Direct in England, where the proletarians are already a majority of the people. I want you to think about this. I've said this so many times on the show. They just, not long ago, and I think it got turned down, thank God, because of the filibuster, but they tried to pass two voting bills. The Democrats, and yes, I say the Democrats, because that's who wrote the bills up, Joe Biden even was for abolishing the filibuster, which the Democrats use, by the way, to get these voting bills passed. Why? Because if you can get the voting bills passed, because they are going to turn us into a democracy instead of a republic. We are a republic constitution. Sorry, we are a constitutional republic. We're not a democratic constitution at all. So to start a communist revolution, you have to turn us from a constitutional republic to a democratic constitution. What that does is it allows the majority, who in the United States is the liberals or the Democratic Party. They are a vast majority. All right, they have more registered voters than any other party. They would win the popular vote every single time. There was literally a bill. You guys can go check it out. It's HJ Resolution 14. It was introduced in January of last year, 2021, right when Biden took office. And it was to abolish the Electoral College and establish a direct popular vote for the President of the United States and the Vice President of the United States. What would that do? That immediately turns us into a democratic constitution where the majority of the people are the ones voting in the president and the vice president. Now, some people will say, well, why wouldn't you want that? The popular vote. If the majority of people want a certain person, they should get that. No. Because when you start talking about economies, and especially a country as large as the United States, where every state has a different economy, a different industry, a different culture, different religions, different skin colors, everything is different, especially in a place as diverse as the United States, you have to have the Electoral College, because if you don't, then you will have the popular vote coming from the largest, 13 to 15 cities, all lying on the coastal U.S., making all of the decisions about what the fucking farmers in Iowa and Nebraska and Tennessee and Alabama and Middle Florida should be doing with their businesses and what's right for them. And that's not good. You're taking away, in the name of giving representation to the majority of the people, you're actually taking representation away from the majority of the people. And when I say you're taking away from the majority of the people, you're taking away from multiple minority groups that now all are in the same group of lost representation. A popular vote, like for whatever reason we keep going and implementing in these other countries over in Europe and wherever, is the worst thing that would happen to the United States. You would have one party winning every single election, and they would just run free will with everything they want to do. It even says this is back in 1848. They were talking about the need to do this, a democratic constitution. It says you need an indirect one in France and Germany, where the majority of the people consist of only the proletarians, but also of small peasants and petty bourgeois who are in the process of falling into the proletariat, who are more and more dependent in all their political interests on the proletariat, and who must therefore soon adapt to the demands of the proletariat. Perhaps this will cost a second struggle, but the outcome can only be the victory of the proletariat. They have bullet points here, though. Now, it starts by saying, democracy would be wholly valueless to the proletariat if it were not immediately used as a means for putting through measures directed against private property and ensuring the livelihood of the proletariat. The main measures emerging as the necessary result of existing relations are the following. And I'm about to go on this, but think about that. It says the democracy would be wholly valueless to the proletariat, which is the poor class, if it were not immediately used as a means for putting through measures directed against private property and ensuring the livelihood of the proletariat. Name me a Joe Biden bill that is either passed or tried to pass that wasn't directed at the lower class or a specific racial group in the advancement of the poor class or the specific racial group, and going along with those two voting bills he tried to pass, trying to turn us into a direct democracy so they can pass the other measures like the Build Back Better plan, like the infrastructure deal, which is not actually infrastructure, it's like more like a human infrastructure deal, to pass their climate change shit. And they're going to use the direct democracy to do that. Therefore, they're going to start taking from Peter to give to Paul. But in this case, Peter is the middle and upper class, and Paul's the poor guy who's not working. or doesn't work as hard. Let me think. There was some private property. If there are people in our Congress right now that would eliminate private property completely. And I'm going to go in here in a little bit on with the private and public property deal. But I want to read these bullet points out because this is, again, going back to the revolution, how they would go about doing a revolution. The first one, limitation of private property through progressive taxation, heavy inheritance taxes, abolition of inheritance through collateral lines, which is brothers, nephews, EDC, and forced loans. The first one immediately. In the United States, we have a progressive tax rate. Biden's tax plan. Again, go on the whitehouse.gov website. I'll link all this information in there. I'm not making this up. I'm getting it directly from the fucking horse's mouth, okay? He's calling for a more progressive tax system by raising the upper tax brackets and raising tax brackets on corporations. Well, you can say, well, it's been there before. Yeah, we were fucking had communist tax rates back then. The best tax rate, flat tax rate, 10%, 10 to 15%, whatever, on fucking everybody. Get rid of deductions. All right, and everyone pays the same percentage. Percentage. That's the fair one. Not the same dollar amount, but the same percentage. Flat tax rate. So progressive taxation, which is exactly what they're doing, trying to make it more progressive. Heavy inheritance taxes. They want to tax unrealized gains. They want to tax something that doesn't even fucking exist. That's unreal. It's not even realized. The gains don't exist, but they want to tax it. They also want to drop the inheritance taxes back down to what they were back in like 2007, which is harder than anything. There's a lot of people that are worth $3-4 million today. There's a lot of married couples, by the way, that are worth, $10 million, especially after the way the market was the last 2 years. And they want to drop it down so they can tax you 50% of that money so your relatives don't get it, the government does, and they can redistribute that money out to the poor people. Again, direct quote from Joe Biden, I'm going to build from the bottom up and the middle out. You can't do it. The only way you can make equality, true equality, that's wrong of me to say. The only way you can create true equity, not true equality, true equity, which is what they're trying to do. They don't use equality anymore. They use the term equity. Completely different. That means everyone gets the same amount. Is by bringing the upper and the middle class down to the bottom and making everyone poor. Again, going back to what I said in the beginning about the slaves. Communism, socialists think it's actually better to be a literal slave than it is to be a working class member of society. Because you're only sold once as a slave, and there's always a demand for you. Whereas if you're a working class member of society, you have to sell yourself every day, be it hourly or daily, and there may not always be a demand for your services. The next bullet point. A gradual expropriation of landowners, industrialists, railroad magnates, and ship owners, partly through competition by state industry, partly directly through compensation in the form of bonds. Oh, that's funny. You know what that means? That means that we're going to pay you in government debt, which means the government is then going to control your interest payments, how much you're paying it back to you, and you're relying on the government to pay that money. It's one thing if you choose to go do that, okay, I'm going to go buy some treasury bonds, but the government's saying, no, we're going to compete with you, but not only are we going to compete with you, we're going to pay for your services with our own debt. And then at any point they can say, fuck you, we're not going to pay you. The next thing, confiscation of possessions of all immigrants and rebels against the majority of the people. Sounds a lot like this whole January 6th thing, huh? How many Democrats have been arrested for protesting? I think there was like $10 or $20 billion worth during the Black Lives Matter protest. And I'm not saying it was the Black Lives Matter protesters. I'm just telling you that the protests that went on, regardless of what they were for, there was fucking $20, $30 billion worth of damage, and how are hundreds of many people dead or hurt? The January 6th riots, one person killed, which was a rioter, and I think there's about just over $1 million worth of damage done to the building. That's it. But they're putting people away for 10, 20 years that participated in this, which is a sham. By the way, go look up, I believe it's the 14th Amendment, Section 4, where it talks about when they go and they investigate insurrections, you can't question the debt that the government incurs while they're investigating this stuff, which means they can just fucking charge people money, investigation purposes, and say, okay, yeah, I worked 10 hours today on this investigation. Here's a receipt, and no one can question it. So it's a money grab. That's in the Constitution, by the way. Go read it. I think it's like Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. So they're going to confiscate all possession of immigrants and rebels against the majority of the people. Again, sounds like the January 6th stuff. Organization of labor or employment of proletarians on publicly owned land. That actually goes back to President Franklin Roosevelt right before World War II during the Great Depression. By the way, Roosevelt was basically a communist and a socialist. He just happened to be kind of the right guy at the right time because of the whole Depression thing. And yeah, he may have helped work us out of the Depression, but his temporary government programs like Social Security are still in place, and it's actually the biggest form of debt that the United States has today. When they keep talking about raising the debt limit, a lot of that is because of the flawed fucking system and scam of Social Security. So, look, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. Just remember that. Organization of labor or employment of proletarians on publicly owned land in factories and workshops with competition among workers being abolished, and with factory owners, insofar as they still exist, being obliged to pay the same high wages as those paid by the state. So right now, I think the actual federal minimum wage, when I say federal, I'm talking about the minimum wage the federal government has to pay their employees is like $15. They've raised that. But it's still like $7.25 or whatever it is for the private sector, depending on what state you live in. Imagine us having to abide by the wage rates of the federal government, and the federal government, remember, can print all the fucking money they want. Well, within certain constraints, but they're trying to get there. They're trying to put on that modern monetary theory, which plays into all this as well, where they can just print all the money they want. And it would crush business. We couldn't afford it. And it would just skyrocket inflation, by the way. Next one. An equal obligation on all members of society to work until such time as private property has been completely abolished. Formation of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. So in North Korea, there's a great video where this South Korean teacher was going, and she got some crazy access. And I can find that video and link it in the description as well. And she starts interviewing a North Korean farmer. He repairs his tractor. It's this old, 60s tractor. And he farms rice. He said as soon as that rice is ready, the North Korean government comes and confiscates the rice. It's called patriotic rice. They give him a little bit for his family, and they take it, and they do whatever they do with it. Distribute it amongst the people, but they control the food supply. If you control the food supply, you control the population, because people will be so hungry they can't think about anything else other than getting food, so they can't think about anything like it's along the lines of revolting. And they can't even start to comprehend the fucked up situation that they're in because they're just so hungry. And that's what's going on in North Korea. It's what goes on in China, a lot of places. It's what happened in the Soviet Union. It's a centralization of money and credit in the hands of a state through a national bank with state capital, and the suppression of all private banks and bankers. Now, I know Raccoon would say, we already have a central bank, all that. We still have private banks, though. They're talking about a centralized bank, but no other competition with that and no support, right? They're talking about complete elimination of private banks. The Federal Reserve was ultimately started to be like a support system, which, by the way, the Federal Reserve isn't necessarily a bank. It's the Federal Reserve System. It's a system, and it has multiple central banks in different locations. It's not just like one bank, but they're there to help support the private banks, not shut them down. If anything, they're there to keep them open. So the exact opposite of what they're talking about here in the communist system. So the government, you're giving complete control of monetary fiscal policy, which it kind of is now, but complete control of the money supply to the government. Next one, increase in the number of national factories, workshops, railroads, ships, bringing new lands into cultivation and improvement of land already under cultivation. All in all, proportion to the growth of the capital and labor force at the disposal of the nation. Next, education of all children from the moment they can leave their mother's care in national establishments at national cost. Education and production together. Gosh, that didn't sound a lot like with the whole... I know a lot of parents, look, I don't have any kids yet. And I know that preschool is expensive. But when we start paying for it, when the government starts paying for it, all right, we start going down this road towards a communist society. You gotta remember, socialism is just the way into capitalism. It's the transformation of a capitalist society into a communist society. And the transformation from a communist society to a capitalist society is a complete collapse of the communist society that happens every single time. And then hopefully the United States comes in there and fucking funds a bunch of money in there and picks you up like Japan and South Korea in West Germany. Otherwise, you end up fucked in the head like Russia. So it says construction on public lands of great palaces as communal dwellings for associated groups of citizens engaged in both industry and agriculture, and combining in their way of life and the advantages of urban and rural conditions while avoiding the one-sidedness and drawbacks of each. And then the last one here, destruction of all unhealthy and jerry-built dwellings in urban districts. Then it says equal inheritance rights for children born in and out of wedlock, and concentration of all means of transportation in the hands of the nation. When they say we're taking it and we're giving it to the hands of the nation, we're giving it to the public, the government runs the public. The government is the public, right? People got to understand this. So all you're doing is you're taking, you have one elite class, like the wealthy and the big business owners and the successful individuals in a capitalist country. All communism is doing is taking those people and putting them into the government and allowing them to control with complete totalitarian and absolute rule over everybody else. And everyone else is just fucking poor. And all they're doing is saying, oh, well, it's, you know, it's in the interest of the public. Everyone owns it. You own it. A good example of a public good or something public, a park is a public service or good. What else? Beaches. A public beach would be a public good, right? Taxpayers pay for that. How many parks have closing times? Government parks, right? Taxpayer-funded parks. How many of them have, okay, you can't be here, you know, from the hours of 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Parks closed until then. What does that mean? That means the government is telling you that, yeah, even though we paid for this with your own money, we still control the times that you're allowed to utilize this service. And to what extent? Is there if you own a house, is there a law as to what time you're allowed to be in that house? No. Is there, they have certain regulations as to what you can paint it and stuff, and I don't agree with that. But, Raccoon says, and they charge you to enter some. Now, you're getting it a little complicated there because there are, like revenue-oriented public things, right, that are funded by the public, but they're actually funded by the public's use of them through user fees. A good way would be like let's say a train station. Let's say we built a railroad system. I believe the one out in California, they were going to fund it with bonds, hopefully, but they're also going to pay those bonds back through user fees and people buying tickets to ride that train. So you're kind of getting a little bit off there. But all in all, same kind of concept. The government still controls what you're allowed to do. Do you think you can just go build a house in a shelter in Yellowstone National Park? Now, we fund that park. It's a federal park. We fund that with our federal income taxes. We pay for everything that has to do with that park. But I can't go just settle in it. Right? No, you can't. Private ownership is everything. If there's anything we actually have in this world, it's private ownership here in the United States, thankfully. See, what they don't take into consideration in this piece of toilet paper is the equality doesn't come from everyone being equal all the time. It comes from the opportunity. In the United States, everyone has an equal opportunity to go and be successful. You may not start at the same place and you may have a tougher road, but everyone's different. Some people are just plain smarter than others. Some people are more athletic than others. By God, I'm not 6'5" and went and played in the NFL. I didn't have the physical capabilities to do so. But maybe I can go start a business and make just as much money as someone who's playing in the NFL and utilize my brain power to go do that and take advantage of that opportunity. The difference in a communist society is the communism saying, no, we don't want any competition at all unless we say it's okay. And it doesn't matter if you're fucking smart or athletic or artistic, whatever. There's no competition. There's no working up. There's no getting up into another class because there is no other class. It's poor or it's nothing. Whereas here, I just want the opportunity. You know, I just want the ability to say that if I don't make it, it's because of something I did, not because of something that held me back from the government. And the reason why I want to say that something that held me back from the government, because I'm the one that pays for the fucking government. So why would I want to fund an entity that's going to limit me and my opportunity? So there's a few other questions. I'm going to post a link to this attachment so you guys can go through and read. It's interesting. I think everyone should go read this whole thing. They do a good job. I will admit they do a good job in organizing this and taking direct writing and ideas from the Communist Manifesto and then putting it into questions so you can kind of break it down and go learn more and not have to read the entire Communist Manifesto. But there was another thing here. Where was it at? By the way, eliminating religions, eliminating any kind of national, other cultures, all that stuff, everyone's one. Everyone's equal. Communism is for the lazy people that don't want to work. Or it's not just the people that don't want to work, it's the people that don't want to admit that it's their fault that they're not successful. They want to place the blame everywhere else. They want to say, it's not my fault I'm unemployed, right? It's not my fault I can't make enough money. I'm just a slave to my job. Great. You already live in the United States. Go start your own fucking business. It is as simple as that. If some other person from a poverty-stricken neighborhood in the United States can go and start a business and become successful, then why can't you? There's no other way to look at it. It's all about equal opportunity. Capitalism provides opportunity to become that bourgeois class and not be a proletarian all the time. Here's the other thing. We don't have a caste system like they do in India, so you're not born into a class. Now, again, not everyone starts at the same starting point. I get it. And it's harder for some people. That's fine. Not everyone is perfect. Some people aren't just meant to be a business owner. Some people will go their whole lives and be an employee of a company with good benefits, and there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody is different. And we have a society that actually caters to all the differences and abilities of people rather than forcing everybody to be the same and limiting the extraordinary individuals that we have. Imagine if people like, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever, these smart people that have been extremely successful. Imagine if we limited these people and said, nope, you can't do anything. You got to go work in a factory. Everyone's got to get paid the same. We would not be where we're at. So you can get on these people about, being worth $200 billion. Great. They worked hard. Fuck Elon. Not Elon Musk, but yeah, hold on one second. Jeff Bezos created Amazon from nothing. So, you got to take that into consideration. Go ahead, Raccoon.
Yeah, most of these guys in the high-tech industry didn't do it by themselves. They had an idea and they brought a bunch of people together and they all thought it out, just like Bill Gates.
But they made it happen. Well, Bill Gates stole that shit.
Listen now. Hold on a minute. He had a computer idea. They built a model of one and said, this is what it's going to look like. And then IBM said, make it happen. And he had to pull in other people to come in and help him design the damn thing. And as far as Jeff Bezos getting Amazon started and his other entities that he's got going, he didn't start them all by himself. He had help from the government to give him tax breaks so he can fund it and get the backing for it. And then he slaves the people that work underneath him.
I'm just telling you, I was just getting at that he grew the business. And here's the thing. I love my tax breaks too, so I'm not going to hammer anyone for taking tax breaks. Yeah.
When you give a multi-billion-dollar company tax breaks, that's like slapping everybody underneath him all the way down to the poorest person making a wage and say, you will pay for his tax breaks. We're increasing taxes this year because we don't have enough money. Okay, if they tax everybody the same, businesses included, by the amount of money they make in percentage, like 15% across the board or 9%, we would be so much better. But instead, the working class pays a combination all the way up to 30%. Because these assholes ain't paying any taxes.
Well, and but it's not that. It's not because they're not paying any taxes. Now they argued that that's what it is, right? But the tax rates would still be the same. Even if do you think if corporations were paying all the taxes they owed,
the government's going to keep the tax rates coming in?
Yeah,
but what I'm saying is, what I'm saying is, if you made everybody across the board say, okay, from now on, all business taxes will be 9% of your gross income, how many of them would fight it? Almost all of them will fight it because they want to keep as much money as they can and screw the people. And when they give them a high tax bracket, it's just like wages. You're paying people more because it's the law. Well, the prices increase. Therefore, you have an artificial inflation due to the fact that the companies are going to continue to keep the percentage they want coming in for their own freaking pockets so they can have their billions and billions and their multi-billion-dollar compounds and vehicles and jets and yachts. I mean, it's a slap in everybody's face because you're struggling and you're trying to get it. And if you don't pay your taxes, what happens? They come after you. Okay. And they thrash you through the day going ringer. I was in that position one time. Okay. They thrashed me through the damn ringer and I only owed them $500 in taxes.
Oh, yeah, they'll come
if I was a multi-million-dollar company, they wouldn't have said a damn thing to me. They would say, well, just pay it when you get a chance. Pay it when you get it through your financial people. But send it. Instead, they come after me and threaten me to take my shit and take all my belongings in my damn house.
Which is true. And look,
that's wrong.
It is. Look.
That was the federal government.
The tax system needs to be changed. All right, and I've said this before. Look, we need a flat tax rate.
It can easily change, but the son of a bitches ain't going to change it.
They don't. You know why? Because look,
they're getting profit out of it in their own ways.
Well, yeah, that too. But think about this too. I just sat here and read half of the Communist Manifesto on the show just now. Okay, and a lot of what I said was because people just don't understand what they're talking about. Like we have legitimate communists here. By the way. The thing I was looking for, it says that the communists will associate with whatever party is going to advance their goals, which it even states in here is the Liberal Party of America, by the way, the Democratic Party. And look, I'm not going to fault a business for having the $1 million compounds and the yachts and stuff because when they go buy that yacht, it takes how many people are they employing to build that yacht? A lot. There's a lot of business.
But do they need it, Mike?
They may not need it, but people still are working.
I mean, it's even like, well, no, listen, it's even like the common man here in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
We enjoy dreaming and buying shit and getting ourselves further and further in debt, trying to keep up with the rich people. I don't. Hell, all my cars are at least 20 years too old. But the thing of it is people thrive on trying to stay up with the Joneses or the Gates or whatever. Who's got the biggest yacht? Who's got the biggest airplane? Blah, blah, blah.
But now you're going down, and I agree with you.
We have to pay the difference. Well, we pay the difference, though. I mean,
so I agree with what you're saying. But you're going down more along the lines of financial responsibility as opposed to like, people buying things they don't need, right?
But
because you can buy things you don't need if you have the money.
Communist.
Yeah, I get that.
The
what I'm saying,
people doing it to us are communists, and they want us to have nothing so they can have more.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that it's one thing to buy something you don't need if you have the money to buy it. That's fine. You're talking about people are going in debt to buy things they don't need and they can't pay for it, but they're trying to do it as a class thing or as a show off thing. Yeah. And I get that. You're right. That's more along the lines of financial irresponsibility though than it is a wealthy person who's been successful in business going and buying a yacht that they pay for.
Some of those businesses give you the credit to do that, and they know that they're going to get you in the end if you can't pay up.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to lose a dime off of you, because if they say you went bankrupt,
the government backs
and they didn't claim anything, they just take it from somebody else or many other people to make up that difference. You know that as well as I do, just like the banks.
And I agree, but that's kind of like a different topic, though. It's the same, but it's different because you're getting into a different kind of conversation.
It's leading us into the Communist Manifesto, which is a guideline, and they can expound on it any way they want, just like China does with the rice example you had.
What's up, Marcus?
Sorry, but the Communist Manifesto is a book for teenagers. It's a propaganda book. It's nothing more than a simplification of all the Marxist theory. Yeah. So when we go deeper in the theme, we can we see different ramifications, and America is now influenced, just like Brazil, for two different schools of thinking delivered by Marx initial thoughts. See, when you go to study history, you go with a Marxist method. If you go with a Marxist method, you are just looking for historical documents, oppressor and oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go with objectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
You go looking for a narrative that fits in your way of thought. May I make myself clear?
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. You're not being objective. You're not being open-minded. You're just saying, okay, this person was bad, that person was good, and that is what it is. And you're right. That's what you get when you read the Communist Manifesto as well. It's all about eliminating the oppressor and stopping the oppressed from being oppressed. The problem is when you in the attempt to do so, you actually are oppressing everybody. Instead of eliminating, you know what I'm saying? You're making the government the one big oppressor in an attempt to say, well, we're not oppressing anybody. But they are. They're oppressing everybody. It's just everyone's equally fucked. So no one's really getting fucked more than someone else. Because in the name of equality. Go ahead.
Vladimir Ilyinov Lenin put the Marxist theory in practice.
Yeah. Lenin.
And he concluded that it's impossible to take a class, especially in Russia, and put in power just like that. Now we have a proletarian dictatorship. It's a dream. It's a utopia. You cannot do that because you create chaos. So what Lenin did, he conceived the Bolshevik Party,
Mm-hmm.
talking about what? We have a small elite of illuminated persons that will direct the oppressed class to equality society.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. I mean, look, I just thought this would be an interesting topic for today's show because a lot of what's going on when I started reading through this, right, and I started, especially about the revolution part and about how they would go about eliminating private property, turning us into a democratic constitution, which, by the way, you would have loved that part right here, and I don't think you were in here when I went over that, and how they use democracy to kick off a revolution, eliminate private property, eliminate any form of private ownership and private business. Like these are all things that actually are being implemented or trying to be implemented in our policy. They're just doing little chunks at a time. It's not an overnight thing, right? Because if they said, "Hey, tomorrow we're passing every law that's going to turn us into the Soviet Union," you would have an uprising like you've never seen before. But to avoid that, they just do it. They chip away. And what's scary is you have people that are my age. I'm 29, right? I'm a millennial. And we seem to be the ones, us, and then the generation that's younger than mine. I don't know what they're called. But who knows what they, them, she, his, it is, right? But these are the ones that actually are being elected into Congress now that have these ideas, like the AOCs. Right? That is why this is scary, because these people are actually coming to power. What's up?
Mike, I wouldn't use her for the example. I mean, she was just a bartender and a stripper.
Yeah, but if she can get in, other people
just
can.
Like that one guy thought if we put too many more soldiers on Guam, it would flip over. I mean, come on. We have a bunch of ignorant people in Congress making laws for us because they promised the world and people bought it.
But the ignorance grows.
But they never.
More people are getting elected for that.
Yeah, but see, they never give you what they promise. They always try to figure out a way to get around it. Mm-hmm. That's about the Communist Manifesto. Is one of the things about it is promise the world, take away their responsibility, and give them subsistence. People think subsistence is everything, but no, it's not. It's the basic needs to keep your ass alive so you'll be a good slave. Mm-hmm. Like you said, control the food, control the daggone population, mm-hmm. control the housing, control the population, control the motive or the restrictions of travel. Mm-hmm. Control the people. I mean, everything is in the Communist Manifesto, but it's just a guideline that show people who are kind of wanting to do it but have no idea how to go about it. But then they expound on everything that they want, because people don't realize, even the leaders, if we had a communist uprising here in the United States and they made us a communist nation, anybody that doesn't fit the agenda will be taken out and put in a mass grave. Mm-hmm. Regardless of how much money you have, if you don't do as the communists want you to do, they'll just kill you and go on. And once those old parts that we have in Congress, once their usage has been used up, they go into mass graves too.
Yep.
I mean, that's the way it is. And only one man or one woman, whoever's in charge of the whole kit and caboodle, is the last one standing, if that's what it takes. I mean, look at what Lenin did. Lenin killed a lot of people, and so did Stalin. I mean, all the communist nations have killed off whole daggone towns and whole states within their countries to get their point across that you will do as we say or we will kill you and your family, and people abide by it because they have no other choice now that they allowed them to take over.
Yep.
And that's what I was harping about yesterday in the show. We don't want this crap. It's not part of the American dream.
That's
of course, you
why
have to be asleep to believe it, you know.
When a guy talks to you about communism and are debating with you, making reference with about Lenin, about Stalin, about Mao Zedong, about Castro's, they are already talking with you, seeing a dead body, because that is their method. That they don't talk to you with the democratic respect of put Democrat in parentheses here, but they don't talk. They won't talk to you as equals. They just see a dead body, because in the end, it's their pretension.
Yep.
So I want to read one more section out of this, though, and this is
Okay, I'll be quiet.
No, you're good. It's pretty interesting. It talks about socialism. Now, again, 1848, right? This is directly out of the Communist Manifesto. Like, I'm not making this up. And they bring up socialism. They even bring up democratic socialism, which is what Bernie Sanders, AOC, that's what all of them abide by. But this one, it's called a reactionary socialist. It says the first category consists of adherents of a feudal and patriarchal society which has already been destroyed and is still daily being destroyed by big industry and world trade in their creation, bourgeois society. This category concludes from the evils of existing society that feudal and patriarchal society must be restored because it was free of such evils. In one way or another, all of their proposals are directed to this end. This category of reactionary socialists, for all their seeming partisanship and their scalding tears for the misery of the proletariat, is nevertheless energetically opposed by the communists for the following reasons. 1, it strives for something which is entirely impossible. 2, it seeks to establish the rule of aristocracy, the guild masters, the small producers, and their retinue, I don't know what that is, retinue of absolute and feudal monarchs, officials, soldiers, and priests, a society which has, to be sure, free of evils of present-day society, but which brought it at least as many evils with it, without even offering to the oppressed workers the prospect of liberation through a communist revolution. That's kind of like going back to what Raccoon has been saying, is the elites that claim to be socialists that have benefited from capitalism. You know, they're not really all about it. They're saying, oh, the world's evil, so we need to go back to when it wasn't evil and go back to these systems on when it was when it wasn't evil. The communists actually don't like them because they think they're fake.
That's a new way of thought delivered from the Frankfurt School.
Mm-hmm.
They concluded that the Marxist movement, the communist movement, cannot control the economy. It's way better to control the culture, to secure the people's thought, because you don't have more. History context.
Yeah,
you have 2 classes only.
Yeah,
you have individuals.
Yeah, so. Let me. So what you're trying to say, because you may need to turn your mic up, Marco, but I think what you're saying basically is, and I kind of lost my train of thought, but I actually just lost my train of thought with that. But I got what you're trying to say. But let me finish reading this. So it says, as soon as the proletariat becomes revolutionary and communist, these reactionary socialists show their true colors by immediately making common cause with the bourgeois against the proletarians. Sounds like a lot of these high up people, like maybe actors or something, that are all about communism and socialism. All of a sudden, when we go to that system, they're like, oh, fuck that. Fuck those poor people, those peasants. I still want my life. That's what, see, at least the communists are consistent and say, well, we don't like them either. Then you have the bourgeois socialists. Again, the bourgeois are like the middle class, but it's really the way they are talking about it, it's like the upper middle class and the upper class. So the wealthier individuals. You have the bourgeois socialists, which is kind of like what I just said with the actors, but it says a secondary category consists of adherents of present-day society who have been frightened for its future by the evils to which it necessarily gives rise. So basically it's saying that they're frightened by the future of, let's say, big business and capitalism, but they're the ones that have created all of those problems, according to the Communist Manifesto, right? They're saying that they're hypocrites. Which they are.
Here in Brazil, we talk about them. We like left caviar left.
Who? You say the caviar left? Oh, I see what you're saying. The caviar left. Yeah. Yep. It says. Oh wait, damn it. Where was my? Oh. So it says, therefore, is to maintain the society while getting rid of the evils which are an inherent part of it. To this end, some propose mere welfare measures. We've heard about this, right? Again, how many wealthy people get up there? We need to have universal health care. You need to tax me more. If we need to tax your ass more, then stop writing fucking shit off of your income. Stop taking deductions and start paying the taxes. And then if you want to pay more, then write a voluntary check to the IRS. Don't fucking ask me to do it. I don't want to pay that shit. To this end, some propose mere welfare welfare measures, while others come forward with grandiose systems of reform which, under the pretense of reorganizing society, are in fact intended to preserve the foundations and hence the life of existing society. Which means they want to reform everything, but they want to preserve their way of life, the wealthier way of life. Communists must unremittingly struggle against these bourgeois socialists because they work for the enemies of communists and protect the society which communists aim to overthrow. The last one, though, this is important. The last one is for the democratic socialists. They define their democratic socialism because this is the popular one we hear about in the United States. Finally, the third category consists of democratic socialists who favor some of the same measures the communists advocate, as described in question 18, not as part of the transition to communism, however, but as measures which they believe will be sufficient to abolish the misery and evils of present-day society. So you often hear democratic socialists saying, I'm not a communist, but people do have the rights to free health care. People do have the right to free preschool. People do have the right to free this and free that, right? They want to eliminate the struggles of life and, the whole dance of life and make everybody happy, but they don't want to go to like full communism. It says these democratic socialists are either proletarians who are not yet sufficiently clear about the conditions of the liberation of their class, or they are representatives of the petty bourgeois, which would be your middle class or your lower middle class, a class which prior to the achievement of democracy and socialist measures to which it gives rise has many interests in common with the proletariat because they're closer to being broke than they are being rich. It follows that in moments of action, the communists will have to come to an understanding with these democratic socialists and in general to follow as far as possible a common policy with them, provided that these socialists do not enter into the service of the ruling bourgeois and attack the communists. It is clear that this form of cooperation and action does not exclude the discussion of differences. So basically what the communists are saying about democratic socialists is a democratic socialist is someone who's a fucking communist, but they don't know it yet. Like they're all about certain things that will lead to communism, but they're not fully understanding the impact of where they're trying to push things. The programs are trying to implement, all the free spending and all that stuff, they're not fully aware of what they're really getting into. So, give the communists some credit. At least they're kind of outspoken saying, it doesn't work in the middle. It's either one extreme or the other, and we don't want the capitalists. We want the communists. We want everyone to be broken, everyone to be suffering, and anywhere in between doesn't work. And they're just saying that we'll work with the democratic socialists, but at some point they need to get on board and they need to get with it. And we'll support you as long as you don't start saying, well, we don't need to be taking everything away. We need to, let people have some things. Again, they're supporting a transition to communism because that's what that includes. So I thought that was interesting when they brought the Democratic Socialists, because that's what AOC and Bernie Sanders and all them are. All they are is a fucking preconceived communist. That's it. That's it.
The democratic socialism delivers from a Fabian society in England. It's reformist way of take the state and their ramifications.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the Facebook feed. Again, people on Facebook, when you watch this, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Find us on Rumble, and again, we'll be back on tomorrow at 6 Central. And thanks for listening.
Find us on Podbean too.